All right, so are you ready to really dig into land ownership in South Africa? You wanted to get the real story. And trust me, this deep dive is going to be pretty eye-opening.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We've got this amazing land audit from the South African government done back in 2017, and it's publicly available, which is great.
It's a fantastic resource.
Yeah, it's like a treasure trove of data,
Yeah.
and we are going to try to unlock it together today. So let's just start big picture. The audit tells us that 94% of South Africa's land is actually officially registered.
It's a huge amount.
Yeah, we're talking 114 million hectares.
Yeah,
That's hard to even imagine.
it is. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, but there's a catch, right? About 6% remains unregistered.
Yeah, mainly state trust land, concentrated in the Eastern Cape and Limpopo.
So why is this unregistered land so important? Is it just like sitting there?
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's actually crucial because it represents a lot of these communal areas with these unique traditional ways of managing the land. So it's not just like empty land. It's land with a history and a culture and a whole different system.
Exactly. And understanding these traditional systems is absolutely vital if we want to create fair and effective land policies in South Africa.
That makes a lot of sense. So shifting gears to the registered land, who are the major players here?
Well, the audit breaks it down into different categories. Individuals actually hold the largest share of private land at about 39%.
All right.
Then you've got trusts owning around 31%, followed by companies snapping up 25%. And lastly, community-based organizations, or CBOs, holding a smaller portion at 4%.
Wow. We've got individuals, trusts, companies. It's a real mix of players. But is it really that straightforward?
It's a bit more nuanced than that. You see, a lot of these companies and trusts are likely owned or controlled by the same individuals. It adds another layer of complexity to the whole ownership picture.
So can you give us an example of how this might work in real life?
Imagine a wealthy individual sets up a trust. Now, this trust owns shares in a company, and that company buys up a huge chunk of farmland. On paper, the company's the owner, but the individual behind the trust ultimately pulls the strings.
So it's all about tracing those connections and understanding who's really benefiting from that ownership. And speaking of farmland, I'm guessing that's where things get really interesting in South Africa.
Absolutely. Farms and agricultural holdings represent a huge portion of the land. The average owner in this category holds a whopping 210 hectares.
Whoa, that's a lot of land. But considering South Africa's history of apartheid, I imagine the racial breakdown of farm ownership paints a pretty stark picture.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
White South Africans own a disproportionate share, about 72%, despite making up a much smaller percentage of the population.
That's a huge disparity. Is this pattern, consistent across the entire country?
Well, when you look at specific provinces, it gets even more pronounced.
Oh, okay.
For example, in the Northern Cape, white individuals own a staggering 77% of farms and agricultural holdings.
Wow, 77%. That's pretty incredible. It really hits home how deeply the legacy of apartheid is woven into, the fabric of land ownership.
Meanwhile, the largest share of farmland owned by Black South Africans is a mere 17%.
Wow.
And that's in KwaZulu-Natal.
So it really puts the need for land reform into sharp focus.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this isn't just about numbers on a page.
Yeah.
This is about, economic opportunity and social justice and people's livelihoods.
Precisely. Access to land is fundamental, and this data underscores the urgent need for more equitable access to this vital resource.
And it's not just about race either, right? I imagine gender also plays a significant role in these ownership patterns.
You're absolutely right. There's a huge gender gap when it comes to owning farms and agricultural holdings.
Yeah.
Males own 71%, while females only own 13%.
That's a massive discrepancy.
Yeah, and it highlights the need to empower women in agriculture. Think about it. Women play a vital role in food production, yet their ownership patterns don't reflect their importance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, imagine, how hard it can be to buy property, even a small apartment. Now imagine trying to access land for farming in a system that's shaped by decades of inequality.
Absolutely.
That's the reality for so many South African women.
It raises some tough questions about access to capital, cultural norms, and the systemic barriers women face.
Absolutely. And is this gender gap, limited to one specific area? Is it across all the provinces?
Unfortunately, yes. Even in the Northern Cape, where women have the highest percentage of farm ownership, it's still only a paltry 12%.
It's a stark reminder that even in areas where progress is being made, there's still a long way to go.
It's definitely food for thought.
So we talked about race, gender. What about nationality? Are there many foreign nationals owning farmland in South Africa?
Actually, no. The vast majority of farm owners are South African citizens. They hold about 92% of the land.
So it's primarily South Africans shaping that agricultural landscape. But I imagine even a small percentage of foreign ownership could have a significant impact depending on where it's concentrated.
That's a great point. While foreign ownership is relatively low overall, its concentration in certain areas can definitely have implications for local communities, resource management, and even food security.
So we've explored these vast agricultural landscapes, but what about life in the city? What does land ownership look like in South Africa's urban areas?
That's where our focus shifts to urban.
Urban.
Yeah, so you might be wondering, what on earth is an URF? Think of it like plots of land in cities where houses or businesses are built.
So like the urban equivalent of farmland,
Exactly.
but just on a much smaller scale.
Exactly. And the ownership patterns here tell a slightly different story.
Okay, I'm all ears. Does the same racial disparity we saw with farmland hold true in urban areas?
Well, while white South Africans still own the largest portion of urban at 49%,
Okay.
Black South Africans hold a more significant share, about 30%, which is closer to their representation in the overall population.
So it seems like the urban landscape is slightly more balanced, but that historical legacy is still present.
It is, but it's also important to note that the patterns vary significantly between provinces, highlighting these different historical development patterns.
And speaking of provincial variations, I'm guessing the Northern Cape might have something interesting to tell us here as well.
You guessed it. The Northern Cape has the highest percentage of URF land owned by white South Africans at a whopping 83%.
83%. So it's almost like a microcosm of the broader disparities we've been discussing, even within this more balanced urban environment.
Exactly. It really underscores the need to consider regional differences when we're analyzing land ownership in South Africa.
And what about the gender gap? Does that persist in the urban landscape as well?
Sadly, yes. Similar gender disparities persist in urban land ownership, with females owning a smaller percentage than males.
It's disheartening to see that pattern, but it's important to acknowledge these inequalities if we want to address them.
Absolutely. And just like with farmland, foreign ownership of urban is also quite low, so the majority of urban land is in the hands of South African citizens.
Interesting. So we've covered individuals, trusts, companies owning land, and now we've explored both vast farmlands and urban. Is there another category of land ownership we need to unpack?
There's one more. Sectional title ownership.
Sectional title ownership. What is that?
Think of apartments and multi-unit dwellings. You know, those big residential complexes you see in cities.
Got it. So are individual the main owners here?
This is where things get interesting because companies actually dominate ownership in this category, holding about 75%.
75%? That's a huge amount of sectional titles owned by companies. Why do you think that is?
It's likely due to property development trends. These companies build these large residential complexes and often retain ownership of many units as investments. For example, in Gauteng, a staggering 87% of sectional title units are owned by companies.
Wow, 87%. That's incredible. It's like a whole different layer of the urban landscape driven by these, larger economic forces.
Exactly, and when you break down sectional title ownership by race, gender, and nationality, you'll find similar disparities to the other categories we've discussed.
So even within this specific niche of urban living, those systemic patterns of inequality continue to play out. It really highlights the complexity of the issue.
It does, and it makes you realize that addressing land inequality requires this multifaceted approach that considers not just who owns the land, but also the forces driving these ownership patterns.
Absolutely. This is fascinating stuff. We've covered a lot of ground already, from vast farmlands to bustling cityscapes, and uncovered some pretty startling statistics, but there's so much more to explore. Stay tuned, because after a short break, we'll be diving even deeper into this land audit report.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to kind of peel back these layers and see the different dynamics at play. And it's important to acknowledge that, this issue of land reform in South Africa is complex, often emotionally charged.
Yeah, for sure.
And there are strong opinions and perspectives on all sides, rooted in history, culture, and personal experiences.
It's a really sensitive issue. So let's bring it back to our listener for a moment.
Okay.
Why should they care about these land ownership patterns in South Africa?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, understanding land ownership is fundamental to grasping the socioeconomic dynamics of any country.
Right.
But in South Africa, it's particularly crucial given the history of apartheid and its enduring legacy.
So it's like a window into the past.
Exactly.
That helps explain the present.
These ownership patterns impact everything from wealth distribution and economic opportunity to social mobility and even political power. It's all interconnected.
So it's not just about who owns the land, but about how that ownership shapes the entire fabric of society.
Precisely. And for those interested in issues of social justice, sustainable development, or even global food security, South Africa's land question offers a really compelling case study.
So it's like a microcosm of larger global issues, reflecting these challenges, and potential solutions that resonate far beyond South Africa's borders.
Absolutely. And amidst all the data and the statistics, it's important to remember the human element. Behind these numbers are real people whose lives are directly impacted by land ownership or the lack thereof.
It's about their livelihoods, their sense of belonging.
Absolutely.
Their hopes and dreams for the future.
Yes. Understanding their stories, their challenges, and aspirations is essential to crafting meaningful solutions. Solutions that move beyond spreadsheets and statistics and address the very real human needs at the heart of this issue.
That brings us back to the land audit's recommendations.
Yeah.
The report called for a land administration commission, national land rights legislation, and a land reform fund. These seem like concrete steps in the right direction.
They are, but it's crucial to remember that these are just starting points. Sure. The devil is in the details, and implementation will require ongoing dialogue, collaboration, and a willingness to adapt.
It's a process, not a one-time fix.
Exactly. And it's important to consider potential challenges and unintended consequences.
Yeah.
For example, how do you ensure that land redistribution doesn't inadvertently harm agricultural productivity or disenfranchise existing landowners?
Those are valid concerns. It's about finding that balance between addressing historical injustices and ensuring a stable, and productive agricultural sector.
Right. And there are questions about how to best structure the land reform fund, how to prevent corruption, and how to balance the interests of different stakeholders.
It's a complex puzzle with a lot of moving parts, but this deep dive has been incredibly helpful in kind of understanding those parts and how they all fit together.
That's the goal. By understanding the complexities of land ownership in South Africa, we can engage in more informed and productive conversations about the path forward.
And it's about equipping ourselves with knowledge.
Absolutely.
So that we can contribute to positive change.
Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to complex issues like this.
Now, this land audit, it provided incredible detail on ownership across South Africa.
Yeah.
We saw how patterns varied by province, land type, and, demographic groups.
Yeah.
But it only offered a snapshot in time, based on data as of 2015.
That's a crucial point. It makes you wonder how the landscape of land ownership might have shifted in the years since this audit.
Oh, for sure.
Think about all the social, economic, and political forces at play. New policies, economic trends, demographic shifts, they can all influence who owns land and how it's used.
Yeah, it's like a constantly evolving landscape shaped by, a million different factors.
What's fascinating here is the potential for future research.
Oh, yeah.
To build upon this audit.
Totally.
Imagine a longitudinal study tracking changes in land ownership over time. We could see trends emerge, identify areas where progress has been made, and pinpoint persistent challenges.
Yeah, and imagine combining this ownership data with other data sets like agricultural yields, economic indicators, or even climate data.
Absolutely. We could uncover surprising correlations, understand the interplay of factors, and develop even more targeted and effective interventions.
It's like piecing together a giant puzzle, one data point at a time.
It opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
Absolutely. This audit has provided a foundation for understanding land ownership, but it's just the beginning. There's so much more to explore, so many more questions to ask.
I agree. And this exploration is crucial for shaping a more equitable and sustainable future for South Africa. A future where land ownership empowers communities, fuels economic growth, and reflects the principles of justice and fairness.
We've only just scratched the surface here, but we're ready to wrap up this deep dive with some final thoughts and leave you, our listener, with some food for thought. So we've journeyed through this incredible land audit report, explored the complexities of ownership, and uncovered some pretty striking disparities. What's really sticking with you after this deep dive?
I think for me, it's the realization that land in South Africa, it's more than just a commodity. It's deeply intertwined with history, culture, and identity.
Yeah.
It's a source of power, but also a symbol of past injustices.
Yeah, like each hectare carries the weight of history, shaping, lives and opportunities in really profound ways.
Exactly. And that makes the conversation about land reform
Right.
so much more than an economic debate. It's about social justice, healing, and creating a future where land empowers all South Africans.
That's a powerful way to put it. Now, the report offered some potential solutions, like a land administration commission, national land rights legislation, and that land reform fund.
Right.
What are your thoughts on these proposals? Do you think they have the potential to create real change?
They're promising steps,
Yeah.
but the key lies in the implementation. It'll require careful planning,
Right.
transparency, and a willingness to adapt and learn along the way.
It's a complex puzzle with a lot of pieces to fit together.
Absolutely. And it raises even more questions. How do you balance the rights of existing landowners with the need for redistribution?
Right.
How do you ensure that land reform leads to sustainable economic development and not just a transfer of ownership?
Right.
How do you engage communities in a meaningful way
Yeah.
and ensure their voices are heard?
These are important questions that demand, a lot of thoughtful consideration. So what do you think our listener, someone who's now more informed about this issue, can do to contribute to, a positive outcome?
Well, I think knowledge is the first step, and they've already taken that
Right.
by joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah.
Now, I think they can stay informed about developments in South Africa, engage in respectful conversations about land reform, and support organizations that are working towards equitable solutions.
Yeah. Even small actions can make a big difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And here's another thought-provoking question for our listener. We've talked a lot about the past and present, but what about the future? How will things like technology, climate change, and global trends shape the landscape of land ownership in South Africa?
It's fascinating to think about.
Yeah.
Could we see innovative approaches to land management,
Totally.
community ownership models, or even, tech-driven solutions that help address those historical inequalities?
The possibilities are endless.
Yeah.
And as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I really encourage our listener to ponder those possibilities, to stay curious, keep exploring, and contribute to the ongoing conversation about land in South Africa.
This has been an incredible journey, from crunching numbers to grappling with, complex social dynamics. We've only just scratched the surface, but hopefully you, our listener, are leaving with a deeper understanding of this really crucial issue. And we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive and come away with some new insights and perspectives. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those tough questions.